Peter unleashed Dame Edna on an unsuspecting public. Was he a hit right from the start?
No, not really. I think Edna began her London, certainly her British career, as a dismal failure. I think Peter, so skilled in divining talent where it might not otherwise be apparent, met me many years ago when I was playing an undertaker in Oliver, which was a musical version of Oliver Twist. No one thought it would run. It's still running somewhere. He was in Beyond the Fringe, I was in Oliver. We were neighbours in the West End. And someone gave him an early gramophone record of mine made in Australia. I don't think they even call them gramophone records anymore. And he thought that I had promise. And a couple of years later, he started a satirical nightclub in Soho called The Establishment. It was the smart place to go. And a lot of very gifted people did Harold Macmillan impersonations there, amongst other things. And he booked me to go on there and do my Aussie monologues, one of whom, of course, was Edna. And nobody laughed at all. Mm. I remember on the first night, the discerning audience were very quick to recognise my absence of talent, and all adjourned to the bar, except for Bamba Gascoigne. Yes? That is a real name for a real person. He was then the drama critic for The Spectator, and he alone stayed and watched the show. He was sitting at a small round table about 3 feet from me, and could see that I hadn't shaved my legs. So that was it. I thought, I'll never do these Australian characters in London ever again, even though Peter Cook thinks they're funny.
But what do they think of you in Australia?
Well, you just have to just stumble, you know, for them to trample you to death in my wonderful sun-bronzed homeland. And I remember once, well, every now and then they have a campaign against me, let's be frank. It's hard to believe in England that this could happen, but my wife presented me with a small son 6 years ago, and I took him home to see my mother in a Melbourne suburb. We looked in the window of the sunroom where my mother sat, seeming to listen to a transistor radio. I said, "Here is Oscar," you know. My mother said, "Shh, shh, listen to this." She said, "This is what they think of you, Barry." And a disc jockey called Patrick Tennyson, they're all named after poets in Australia, was interviewing housewives about how bad I was for Australia. And a woman was saying, "Well, I agree with you, Patrick. I've never seen Brian Humphries' shows, but I'm sure he gives a very bad image of Australia, and that's why English migrants aren't coming here." And my mother looked up, nodded at our son. She said, "That's what they think of you, Barry. That's what they think of you." I couldn't get a word in edgeways, so I went to another room and telephoned the radio station as Edna. I got through immediately onto the programme, and I said, "Hello, Patrick, it's Dame Edna here. I've just been listening to your show, and I heartily agree with you. Barry Humphries is a passé entertainer. He never was funny, in my opinion, and I happen to know his mother agrees with me." My mother turned off the set and devoted her attention to her grandson.
Peter was not only responsible for unleashing Edna on the British public, but also through Private Eye, Barry McKenzie, wasn't he? Yeah. What happened to Barry? How did Barry start?
You see, in spite of Edna's failure at The Establishment, Peter still had this mad faith in my ability. He said, "One of your recorded sketches is about an Australian in Earl's Court. We all used to live there. I mean, now it's South African puffs, I think, live in Earl's Court. But in the old days, it was called Kangaroo Valley. I think one dentist established himself there, and all the Australians flocked there. And he said, this character who's wandering around Earl's Court and drinking a lot of Foster's lager, which was a sort of beverage you could only get at one off licence, I think, and one pub. He said, that character's got potential. Why don't you do a comic strip about him?"
Tell me more about the things Barry said. Which ones did you actually make up? Because some of the famous ones, like pointing Percy at the porcelain, was that Australian folklore, or did you make it up?
I can't remember anymore. I might have heard it once. Yeah. I certainly did it more than once. But, of course, in a comic strip, if you want to teach the reader a new form of language, a new usage, you have to keep repeating yourself. I liked the word chunder very much, which was Barry McKenzie's for being sick, you know, sort of enjoying oneself in reverse, as it were. There were various explanations about the origins of the word chunder. It was suggested it might have meant watch under. It might have been something that you shouted if you were on a boat.
That's what I heard.
Perhaps even a convict ship. That's the one I prefer to subscribe to, but I had to keep repeating the word to teach the readers about chundering, which meant Barry McKenzie had to be sick a lot. He was sick in almost every episode. It's surprising that beer ever took off, isn't it?
Yeah, unusual experiences, though, with, who is it, Mr. Gort, I remember.
Yes, he went to a suburb of London called Rickmansworth in order to meet a family that they'd sent fat to during the war. I remember in Australia, you're too young to remember this, Clive, but a lot of houses in Australia during the Second World War were fat for Britain depots. And people on Sundays used to save the dripping from the roast, string and all, and little chips of roast potatoes, and leave them in a tin outside someone's house. And this would be shipped off, you see, to the ponds. Fortunately for you, most of it got torpedoed by the Japanese. So there's a lot of Australian dripping at the bottom of the Pacific. But Barry insisted on going to see this Rickmansworth family, the head of which was played by the late Dennis Price, a distinguished star of Kind Hearts and Coronets, by then fallen upon more difficult days. And he played the part of Ronald Gort, who invited Barry McKenzie into his study and then put a schoolboy's hat on his head and spilt the ink. And he said, "Oh, Mr. McKenzie, look, I've been naughty. You'd better punish me." And bent over, offering Barry McKenzie a running shoe of some kind. A fanciful incident which, of course, could never happen, as you know, in the real world.
Some people in rapidly changing the subject here. Some people in Australia suggest that Barry McKenzie and Les Patterson and so on are holding back Australia's image abroad.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything to this, in your opinion?
Well, it's difficult. I think, really, perhaps they are. But that was my intention, after all. No. It's odd, isn't it, that people like John Cleese, who make wonderful comedies about bad service in British hotels, never get wrapped over the knuckles. But in Australia, you just have to make a few little jokes about our more endearing faults to be accused of treachery. Indeed, pilloried as a traitor.